So welcome to this Rocket software installation video. In this video we'll be installing the MVX product, so this is the MultiValue experience product, and we are going to go through some steps to finally be able to test the installation. But first we're going to be talking about the Rocket Business Connect site, how we can self-register against that site. Then we're going to talk about some of those minimum database requirements, because we're going to be switching on a component on the database side and able to pull in diagnostics into the MVX server. Then we're going to be installing MVX on Windows. Then we're briefly going to set up a new user and testing the installation to see if everything is working okay. The MVX server registration is highly dependent upon your RBC details, so we need to make sure they're correct. Here we are with the browser window looking at the RBC site here at the login screen, and you'll notice that you're required to have an RBC ID and a password. If you don't have an RBC ID, you would need to be contacting the RBC team at the contact details down here below, so rbc@rocketsoftware.com. If you have simply forgotten your ID, there is an option for some self-help here. You click on that, you're required to put in your email address and they will send your current ID to you. And if you, likewise, if you want to change your password or you've forgotten it, you can simply click on these self-help options here. Once that's all done, you should be able to simply submit and log in, and you'll be presented with some options and stuff like that. In terms of MVX, if you have ordered an MVX license, you will have some certain details on this license. And here we are with an 8-digit MVX serial number. What's really important about this is obviously the number itself, because you need that for the registration, but you also need to know what version of the MultiValue experiences product you have. The platform is less important, it's not used for the actual registration, but your user is. So this is the owner of the actual serial number. So for instance, if your colleague has ordered an MVX product for you, make sure that it's actually the end user, or you are the actual owner of the license, so there's no conflict there. The RBC contacts via the registration is very strict, and you may get some feedback with the RBC details not being correct. So therefore, log into your RBC site first and make sure you've got the absolutely correct details for your registration, because if you can't see them in RBC, the MVX server registration can't see them either. So let's have a look at the database aspect of the MVX installation. We need to have a database installed. It needs to be licensed, and although you can use various licensing models, even eval licenses need to be actually licensed. And if we have a quick look here on this Windows box here, I'm bringing up our Universe control panel, and here for starters you can see which version of Universe I'm using in this case. In this case I am using one that meets the minimum requirements, and it's actually currently running. Now we can also check whether the product has actually been licensed, and for that command we can use regen-z. We need to run that from the Universe home directory, in fact. There we go, and there we check that the product in fact has been authorized. The next part of it is that we need to make a slight change. In order for Universe to work with MVX, we need to switch on the performance shared memory, and we need to make a change into the UV config. If I bring up Notepad here, this is the UV config from my Windows installation here, and within UV config there is a performance monitoring switch that by default is switched off, but we need to switch that on. And once we have switched on or to make this change into UV config, we need to save it, we need to bring Universe down, and we need to run the UE regen against database before we restart it again, so ensure it's actually running with this component. Now, if you're using the control panel, the universe control panel, you won't actually be able to see that it makes much change inside of the startup, but the universe startup log will make a comment that it has in fact started up in this mode. So that means that, for example, you won't be able to see anything in terms of an extra process or anything like that running, but you will be able to see the startup log for universe that the performance shared memory has been created, and that means we're good to go. So the next step is really the MVX installation in itself. So for installing the MVX server on Windows, we need to have Docker Desktop installed. Now, this is not our product. You need to go out on the internet and download the Docker Desktop application and get up and running. In some cases, for larger companies, you probably have to pay a fee because there's some sort of license for it. I believe for students, developers, or whatever, they're just playing around with, there is no fee. However, once that has been installed, I suggest you do the following check on DOS prompt. And simply do docker -- version, and that feedback that the Docker gives you there is actually used during the MVX installation script. It checks whether Docker is running and whether it can continue. If for some reason it's not, there will be a warning message that says Docker is not currently running. Okay, so let's install the MVX product on Windows. I have here MVX, the product file, zipped file, expanded, decompressed, and you will see that within, and this is the latest version we supply, that within the subfolder of that there are two products. In fact, there is the MVX server and the MVAdmin. What we're doing at the moment is the MVX server, so we'll click on that one, and you'll see that MVX is available on both Linux and Windows, but it's all contained within one package, so it doesn't matter whatever platform you need it for, you just use the same zip file. And we have an MVX setup file that will be running as administrator, and we're going to try and install that. We'll accept the license agreement. I'm going to go with the default location, but you may have your own preferences. And this is quite an important screen. This is the screen where we need to make decisions about the network. First of all, you'll notice there are a few ports here, and there are actually more ports than mentioned here. But there is a web port, which is the communication port we're actually going to be using into the MVX server, and that needs to be open in the firewall. Likewise with the other ports here. Additionally, there is also a port for the MVAdmin later on, which is 8383, and there is also the UniRPC services file, also needs to have the port open, but that's only if you're doing everything on a sort of local server. For the UniRPC, you may not have Universe on the same server, it could be somewhere else, most likely somewhere else. Now, there is an option to put in your MVX hostname here. It all depends really whether would want to use host only or whatever. It should be able to resolve it, but we could in fact put something in here, and we'll just grab the host name from here. There we go, we've got a host name. There we go, and we can see there is also a option to change the data directory, but since I have already decided previously that I wanted the default location, it's going to put the data in a subdirectory to that default location. There's an option up here that says use host network. Now, if in the case that there are some issues with resolving DNS or resolving for example the RPC or whatever via DNS and so forth, you can use your local host file and put in your details of names and IP addresses. In this case I won't. In this case I'll be actually using a DNS server, and also I can put in some options for the suffix, so the domains I'll be searching for resolving certain host names. Now this value here for the DNS server, it can in most cases be trusted, but I would verify it. So typically what you will see that you will have, on depending what platform you have, but you may have a number of DNS servers. In this case here you'll see that I have 3, but only one of them is a primary. It may not have picked up the correct one, but the way we can check that, or the way I suggest you check it, is by using the ns lookup command and see whether we in fact have the right DNS server in here. So, and I'm going to use the RBC server to make sure it gets there, because if there's no communication to the RBC server, there is no way of registering the MVX product later on against the RBC site. So there we go, we've got our answer back. In fact, it has picked up the correct value in here, so we're good to go. So now we'll continue. So I'm now resuming the recording. The MVX installation has completed. It took an additional 5 minutes, and we're now at the point where everything should be running, but we can do a quick check by going to the directory in which we installed MVX, and we can check what the status currently is, and we can see everything is running. So that kind of completes that part of the installation. While we're at it, we could install the MVAdmin as well. Now, as you probably already know, the MVX really has 2 components to it. One thing is the MVX server, which is going to be the interface to the administration that's going to happen. But to assist the database side, we are going to install on the side of the database the MVAdmin. So because I have everything on the same machine, I will now install the MVAdmin. What you'll see is that in that same installation package that we uncompressed, there is an MVAdmin folder, and in there is a MVAdmin setup file. There are additional setup files should your database be on Linux or AIX, but in this case I'm just going to install this one here for Windows. I'm going to accept the license. I'm going to use the default location for installing it. I need to make now a decision, and this decision is what user and password can access the database. So this is the same user password you'd use, for example, if you do a Windows Telnet connection into the database. It's in this case basically communicating with UniObjects, but in any case I'm going to put my details in here, and the installation is fairly fast, and there we go, it's completed. So that really completes the installation part for MVX Server and MVAdmin for Windows. Now we obviously want to be able to communicate to these servers and finalize the setup. Let's give it a trial run. We know that MVX was up and running, and we are going to interact with the MVX server via browser window. So we'll get a browser window up and running, and in this browser window we're going to be communicating with the local host, but we're going to use the fully qualified domain name and then communicate on port 9243. As it's the first time we're logging in, we're going to log in with super admin, and it's going to ask us to try to register with our details. So in this case it's my RBC username, RBC password, and then the serial number for which I have, in case it's one that is specific to me, and then try to register the product. This registered fine, there are no errors. If there were errors, we would need to have a look in the logs that are under the server installation directory, and we'd have to find out what sort of errors they are. Usually customers hit issues around breaching the RBC server, and that's why it's so important to get the NS lookup during the installation to make sure you can communicate before that point. Any issues come to support around this initial registration. In any case, we're going to try and register an instance, and in this case I'm going to try and register a local instance that I have here, but also I want to create my own user because I don't want to be using super admin. So at the moment we've only got a super admin account. I'm going to create myself, and here we go. I have a choice whether I want to be a viewer admin or super admin. I want to be super admin so I can create other users further down the line. I'm going to insert my primary email address. I'm going to put my RBC details in here because it will be checking against my installation. Create new user and close. And now I wish to log out and log back in with my new user. We're now me, and now I wish to register a database against this installation. In this case it's actually on the local server, so I'm just going to copy the URL here, put that into the host name. This is a Windows box, so let's make it simple here, and in this case it's test, but again make sure that your port 8383 is open and so forth, and we'll try to register this one. And there we go. It has picked up that we had a University 1135 installation here running. We can view it, and here's the initial impressions of trying to get back data but this is just the initial, just gearing up everything. I believe this concludes that the installation is complete. I would however just show one more thing, which is in case there is a problem reaching the actual MVAdmin part. So what we just saw here with registering an instance is actually a communication between the MVX server and the MVAdmin, and there is a port number on which you can communicate with the MVAdmin, and here, should there have been a problem, could be passwords or whatever, we could have checked whether the connection between the MVAdmin and the database is valid or not. In this case it is, but otherwise that will be another check to do. Okay, I think this completes the initial testing.